Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another video here on the channel. It would normally be an overbooked video today, but because of some scheduling snafus, I don't even know if we can call it a snafu, because of scheduling, that's not what you're getting today. And I thought to fill the gap so that you are not left contentless this week, I thought that I would talk about 2024 new releases. I'll be honest, I have been less on it with new releases this year than I have been in previous years, but I have read 11 of them, and I thought I would chat with you about them. We can see if there's anything that maybe you feel like you've missed. There's an opportunity for you to tell me in the comments what you really think I should have already read this year. I just wanted to have a little bit more of a chill sit, I'll put the covers up, we'll have a little chat thing. I have already done this technically as a Patreon live stream, so thank you to my patrons for effectively sponsoring this video and the forethought that went into it. This is in no particular order. I think it is technically in the order that things have as their pub date but on Storygraph, so it's not entirely accurate, because the first book on my list is Sanctuary of the Shadow by Aurora Asher. Now, this is not a great place to be starting for me because I have a lot of complicated feelings about this one. I don't know if I didn't like this because it was not good, or if it was because I didn't realise it was a slightly spicy romantasy book when I picked it up. So bear all of that in mind. If you love this book, if you're a big Aurora Asher fan, this is probably based at least partly because I wasn't sure what I was getting myself in for. And that's on me, and I'll cop to that. This is a book about a woman who is working in the circus. She is in hiding, and they bring a kind of creature to the circus, and she sort of falls for that creature in a way. That's the bare bones of it. I would say it is not a book I would read if you're reading it for the circus setting, right? Which is what drew me in. I love a circus book. I've read so many of them. Very few of them are very good. And I was like, maybe this time, but no, once again, the circus proves to be just sort of like a little bit of a backdrop, and we leave the circus fairly quickly. I didn't love this. I think the more I'm kind of distant from it and I have a bit more space to think about it, the more I land on probably also just wasn't very good, as well as being something that I wasn't necessarily expecting. However, I do think there is a time and place for that kind of book. I just wasn't in that time and place, and I very rarely am. Shifting from that into space opera, we have The Principle of Moments. We have time travel, we have space travel, we have the distant future where humanity has been enslaved, we have the Georgian period where we have a time traveller having an affair with Prince George. What a time. I think my feelings on this are slightly dependent on how future books in the series go. And that's been a big thing for me in the last year, is first books being really dependent on their sequels. I liked this. There was so much to fit in, and it was a long book and an awful lot of setup, an awful lot of character stuff that had to get done, that it ended up feeling very much like a setup for dominoes that have yet to be knocked down. That doesn't make it a bad book, it just very much is a case of, I think I would have preferred to be able to go straight into book 2 and just get a feel for everything, whereas as it stands, I know I'm going to need to reread book 1, so it just felt like a little bit of a slog. However, I do think thematically it was really good. I do really enjoy a lot of elements about it, and I have a full video up for it if you want to check it out, because that's from the start of the year when I was organised. City of Stardust is a ethereal fantasy book, is how I've described it in my review. It's sort of on the edge of being literary fiction, I think, to the point where the next book from this author could be litfic, or it could go into much more of a fantasy direction. It's right on that line. This is about a young woman whose family has a pact with a person/entity that the best and brightest of every generation will be given up to that person, and it is Violet's turn because her mother went missing and sort of skipped out on the bargain, and they're on a deadline to try and work out what's going to happen. And at the same time, the entity/woman's assistant is awfully nice looking, and he seems to have all the answers. I do have a review video up for this as well, so if you want full details you can check out there. I liked this a lot. I don't know that I would have liked it so much if I hadn't had the audiobook. I think reading it physically, it might not have landed quite so well. But the case is that I did have the audiobook, and that is what happened, and I did really enjoy it. It didn't quite stick the landing for me, I have to confess, but overall a good time, and I would read more from this author if she leant more in a fantasy direction, because litfic's not really 100% my thing. And Education in Malice by S.T. Gibson. I loved Dowry of Blood, and I think this does share some DNA with that, partly because it's to do with vampires. This is a Carmilla reimagining, and also because of the exploration of toxic relationships is probably the best way of putting it. So if you are planning on reading this, check out the content warnings. Carmilla is a very old vampire story. It's a sapphic vampire story, and this is that, but brought to the slightly more modern day, set in a private school. Anything more I say, I think, would probably spoil elements of it. But yes, exploration of power dynamics in relationships and toxicity. This felt slightly too long. I think it should have been cut back slightly and been more of a novella, is my personal opinion. But I did think it was a really interesting book. I don't know if it's one that I'm delighted to reread again. And it didn't have quite the same emotive quality that Dowry of Blood had for me. But if we're not just comparing them one to one, I think they're both very good books. The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett is another one where Organised Judith has put up a review. This is Robert Jackson Bennett's mushroom murder mystery Leviathans kind of story. This is a truly wild one. It's wacky, it's murderous, it's heartwarming, it's just very surreal in a lot of ways. I don't know if I could adequately explain everything about it to anyone with it sounding like a coherent book. I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to future books in the series. Murder mystery, esoteric detective and their companion just going about their time while also enormous leviathans sometimes come out of the ocean. I enjoy it. I have a great time. Yes. I can save Editing Judith one cover because I have this next to me. Fathomfolk. This is a story about a world which is inhabited by humans and also water spirits of all different kinds, and it is about injustice. It is about kind of the police force in a city. It's obviously hugely metaphorical in a lot of ways for our current world. I liked this. It hasn't really cemented itself in my mind in any real way. I don't think I would be jumping up to reread it anytime soon. I might read a sequel, but I'm not wild about it. It just hasn't really stuck with me, and I don't know how much of that's because of my headspace when I read this, or if it's because of just it not being entirely sticky for me. I'm going to hang on to it for now. I'm not going to unhaul it immediately. We'll see how I feel later in the year about whether it needs a reread and an overbooked video or if it just needs to go. The Weavers of Alama. This is the sequel to The Daughters of Izdihar. I read this very recently and I really enjoyed it. If you want a fantasy duology that packs a punch just as two books and explores women's suffrage, women's rights, kicking down the patriarchy, though be warned, the book does feature a very strong patriarchy, so if you don't like reading that, this isn't going to work for you. But also they have elemental magic called weaving. It's great. I really like this as a sequel. Orbit has been kicking my butt with sequels in the last probably year now, I think. Just second books have been really working for me. I don't know if it's because they're so trying to overcome the sophomore slump. Perhaps, I don't know. A Letter to the Luminous Deep I talked about a lot at the start of the year. This is an epistolary novel. It's a fantasy romance about two neurodivergent coded characters who fall in love through a series of letters, but we only have the letters in the book because their loved ones are investigating their disappearance. And it's a really lovely story. I know some friends bounced off it, but for me it worked really well. I liked the characters, I liked the tone of the book. I thought it was interesting how they managed to capture the intimacy of the letters and also the way they squeezed in getting more direct communication between the characters. I thought that was cool, and you can read it for yourself if you want to find out what I mean. I'm really interested to see how a second book gets formed because it's so tight. I fear the second book won't be as good because conceptually the letter thing doesn't necessarily make sense with how the end of book one happened. But I guess we're going to find out eventually. The Brides at High Hill is the next book in the Singing Hills cycle by Mi Vo. In this, we follow our main character, a monk, as they accompany a young bride on the way to her wedding. If you've seen the cover, which I will have put on screen, I can't see it right now. Through the magic of editing, you will be able to see it. If you know a lot of folklore, you might think you know what this story is going to be. Rest assured you do not. It's a really interesting take on that kind of inspiration. I like this. I really need to sit and do another full read through of the Singing Hills cycle because each book that gets added to it shifts my perspective on what the series is trying to do. And I just think getting another reread in with the last two books as well would probably be very good for my brain. So perhaps later in the year we'll do a little novella read through of Singing Hills again. Most recently I finished The Hemlock Queen by Hannah Witten. This is the second book in a series that I do not know the name of, but the first book is called The Foxglove King. This is a book about death magic and the kind of classic fantasy plot of young street urchin with hidden past and secret powers that no one can know gets caught up in palace politics, and this one has a lot to do with like forbidden power and the fantasy church, and book two was really interesting. I thought it dealt with a lot of themes. Again, similar to Education in Malice. Something's to do with toxic relationships and sacrifice and all of those themes that often crop up in second books of that kind. I felt like while it was way too long as a sequel, it's like 500 pages or something silly, it still had a lot of very interesting takes on some of those tropes and ideas, which I appreciated. I thought that was interesting. And while I'm not telling everybody to dash out and buy themselves a copy of the book right now, I do think it was... I'm glad that I've read it, and I would read book 3, and that's where I've landed on it. And the last book I will mention isn't even out yet, because Past Judith was so on top of their game that I read The Cautious Traveller's Guide to the Wastelands like a year early or something silly. So I do have a video for this. It is not yet up. You can go watch it if you are a patron of the Spectres or Poltergeists tier. So if you're interested on my thoughts on that, you can check that out. It is a fantastic, slightly scary story about a train that goes across from Russia to China, except that that space between is a horrifying sort of wasteland, but a fantasy one, and everything is very scary, and the train gets corrupted, and it's weird and wonderful, and I'm very excited to release that video because past me put it far better than present me could. It was a good time, and I'm excited for more people to have read it. And yeah, those are the new releases I've read this year. The next thing I am picking up is The Sword Unbound by Gareth Hanrahan. I have a number of other new releases that I just need to get to, and there's a lot of things that I'm really excited for in the second half of the year, which tends to be the sweet spot for fantasy. September-y time, it's a great time to be a fantasy reader. Which new releases of these have you read? Do you have any wins for 2024 that you want to tell me about? Any big recommendations? Anything huge that I've missed off this list? Let me know down in the comments below. While you're commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also come hang out on Discord where we have chill chats about books. I'd like to say an enormous thank you to all the ghosts who haunt me over on Patreon. They support the channel and in return get early access to videos, bonus content, live streams, and more. If you'd like to join their number, that's linked below as well. Thank you so much to you for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one.